Like and subscribe in the next 5 seconds, or this will be in your bed tonight. What's the strangest conspiracy theory you heard that actually turned out to be true? Project MK Ultra, aka CIA mind control program. That stuff is terrifying. Reassuring really, since with the best scientists in the world they couldn't work out how to reliably control people's behavior. The NSA conducting mass domestic and foreign surveillance, courtesy of Edward Snowden. Why is this not higher? It absolutely started as a conspiracy theory many years ago and Snowden's leaks proved it was true. Half of these posts can't even be defined as conspiracy theories. Personal anecdotes about your high school? What? The Free Britney conspiracy. I saw so many people on Instagram especially that were just convinced that all her weird Instagram videos were cries for help because she was being controlled by the scenes and thought it was kind of a ridiculous theory. But with everything that came out in her court cases in the later half of 2020, it seems like all of that was actually correct. Britney Spears really was in an abusive, overbearing conservatorship for over a decade. Isn't she still in it? Say what you want about Alex Jones, but he nailed that pedophile island thing like 10 years before we knew about Epstein. This is why I wish Alex Jones would calm the fuck down. There's a lot of stuff that he has genuinely exposed that no one cares about because he over embellishes. He sees that a company has dumped chemicals into a river that made the frogs hermaphrodites and he goes there putting chemicals in the water that turned the freaking frogs gay. He reads a story about corruption and immediately goes to aliens, pedophiles are controlling the government. The grains of truth in his stories are shocking enough on their own. He doesn't need to turn everything into a sci-fi movie for clicks, but he does. He was even the one who took the pictures that showed high-level politicians worshipping a giant owl in the Bohemian Grove. He could have been a serious journalist if it weren't for his impulse to jump to conclusions. Operation Midnight Climax. US government hired sex workers to dose Johns with LSD to test mind control capabilities. Then, they expanded the program to dose citizens at restaurants and other public places. Bonus. A lot of government research projects discussed in the menu stare at goats, like be able to kill goats through staring and mind power. I love that movie, it's crazy lol. The US government dumping massive amounts of crack into black communities in the 80s. To fund their black ops crap all over the world without being traced by regulators. Not sure if this was Bush the older's doing. Got one over on Reagan or if Reagan knew and pushed this mess. Either way, this is a fine lesson in holding our elected officials accountable. Like now would be a great time to do so for those in office now and recently out of a job. If the US behaved like the French, we'd have mobs in the streets over the recent shenanigans. How the sire was proposing population control and JFK considered it but turned it down. So that's why they killed him. The CIA recruited top American journalists to spread propaganda in the media and gather intelligence. Recruits. The Solitaire and Minesweeper games included with Windows were actually training tools to teach users how to use a mouse to right-click, double-click, and drag. USB ports are deliberately made to be difficult to orient, in order to gently habituate users into the abort, rethink, retry mental paradigm which is so useful when dealing with computers. Before Maxis started making games like SimCity and The Sims, their first commercial program was a training simulation for managing a petroleum refinery. They realized the game potential of this kind of software when the end users training to run the refinery found it more fun to simulate catastrophic refinery accidents. The Solitaire and Minesweeper games included with Windows were actually training tools to teach users how to use a mouse to right-click, double-click, and drag. I don't think that was ever considered a conspiracy. November 2019. Times of India newspaper. Small snippet of news in the global section of the paper. A new disease found in China. Then a few days later, news that China is building a new hospital in 10 days. I told my family that this is gonna be a problem in the coming year. They told me to shut up and not say stuff like that. January 2021, and no one remembers what I said. My soon-to-be ex-wife did the same thing when it hit that nursing home in Washington. She eventually did a 180 when her mother got hit, and the small town we lived in had their tiny hospital overrun to the point they were shipping patients to the big cities nearby. The whole Hobby Lobby funded Al-Qaeda theory. Absolutely wild. I remember this. The investigation concluded that the business had no clue the artifacts were stolen. That is wild. Well, it was a very local conspiracy theory, high school rumors, but basically this one teacher and another teacher, a few months after a class trip they both chaperoned, they got married, and 9 months after the trip she gave birth. Mrs. Krabappel and Principal Skinner were in the closet making babies, and I saw one of the babies, and the baby looked at me. The rumor that the Gulf of Tonkin incident was fake turned out to be true. I don't think it was fake. Well, it definitely wasn't so much as an embellishment. It was obviously still cynical and dishonest, but it wasn't an entirely fabricated incident, which I think it is often taken to be. My boss has been dipping his toe in QAnon bullshit, to the point where I'm sending out my resume for other jobs. He's full of shit, and I take pleasure at showing him proof he's wrong. But the other day he said something about the government being forced to disclose all information they have on UFOs and aliens soon because of something put into the most recent COVID relief budget bill. I checked it out on Snopes and sure enough it's legit. We'll be having some UFO disclosure this summer. Does your boss actually know that UFO can be any flying object that isn't identified, or is he expecting aliens? The Tuskegee experiment, among other things, intentionally dosing hundreds of black men with syphilis during their military vaccinations, I believe, because the government doesn't have enough data on the effects of syphilis in black males. For every bullshit human rights, ethics, moral violation that comes to light, there must be many more such events taking place. Edit. I've been informed that by not editing my statement, I'm spreading rumors and misinformation and thus performing a disservice to the general public, who, having seen my slightly erroneous message, would then have been misled into fueling this version of events, leading to conspiratorial developments in the public sphere. As an upstanding American citizen, let me then perform my public duties to their utmost and fullest, such that I, being the only accepted and valued source of information on government operations, shall not misguide the nameless idiot masses who take my word as holy writ. That better? The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was ethically horrendous, but not in the way you claimed. The subjects already had syphilis. They were not intentionally infected by the investigators. When the study began, 1932, there was no established treatment since the relevant antibiotics did not exist, so the idea of following a cohort of untreated subjects to see what happens to them was a reasonable idea. However, the subjects were misled about their diagnosis, what the study was doing for them, and how long the study would last. And then later, when antibiotics became available that could treat syphilis effectively, the study continued without providing that treatment. Wikipedia.org link. This is very Southern high school football, but there was a conspiracy theory that was mostly treated as a joke that these two high schools were bribing kids who were good at football into moving into their districts. Mostly it was spurred by the realization that a bunch of star players on both teams were transfers and had been for years. It was mostly laughed off because most of them claimed that they moved for the better football program rather than the other way around. Eventually there was an investigation and basically the coaches, with financial support from God knows where, we're literally paying for apartments for these families to change high school neighborhoods so they could join their program, and in at least 2 cases, bought them cars. High school football in the US is a corrupt dumpster fire. From an FOIA request in court, it came out the CIA was actually trying to read our brainwaves with radio waves. It didn't work, but still. You claim. The government actively participated in UFO disinformation campaigns. To hide the existence of aliens or stealth aircraft? In November of last year, my brother's friend said coronavirus will change our lives and it will be the next pandemic. At the time I thought that he was full of shit, but here we are now. November 2020, wait, hadn't all that been obvious by then? This one is more local, but the rumor was that a guy in the football team murdered 2 people on another team after they beat him, then killed his girlfriend because she was related to one of the guys he killed, and then slit his own throat. Turns out that was true. Edit. Misread the question. Not a conspiracy. Don't upvote this comment. This sounds like the crimes of an individual. Conspiracies need at least 2 actors. The Pigford case, where the USDA systemically eliminated black farmers because of racism in the 80s and 90s. I've never heard of this lawsuit. WTF. This is mind-bogglingly recent. Chemicals turning frogs gay. Not quite true, but close enough. It turns out if you dump a bunch of now banned plastics into the habitats of amphibians, which determine sex through hormones rather than chromosomes, then they can spontaneously change gender. Project Sunshine. Eisenhower's answerable to his gory deeds. Project Sunshine. On the 18th of January, 1955, then Commissioner Dr. Willard Libby said that there was insufficient data regarding the effects of fallout due to a lack of human samples, especially samples taken from children, to analyze. Libby was quoted saying, "I don't know how to get them, but I do say that it is a matter of prime importance to get them, and particularly in the young age group. So, human samples are often of prime importance. And if anybody knows how to do a good job of body snatching, they will really be serving their country." 4. This led to over 1,500 samples being gathered, of which only 500 were analyzed. For many of the 1,500 sample cadavers were babies and young children, and were taken from countries from Australia to Europe, often without their parents' consent or knowledge. 5. According to the investigation launched after a British newspaper reported that British scientists had obtained children's bodies from various hospitals and shipped their body parts to the United States, a British mother had said that her stillborn baby's legs were removed by British doctors, and to prevent her from finding out what had happened, she was not allowed to dress the baby for the funeral. 5. Don't know if it exactly fits, but I remember a couple of years ago seeing this 4chan post get passed around on and the internet, which eventually resulted in the 2016 South Korean political scandal that culminated into the impeachment and removal of the South Korean president. There's a eugenics program that gets volunteers through anti-vax and anti-masker movements. They are volunteering themselves to be killed off. Is this an actual program, or is it sarcasm referring to people basically killing themselves off due to the refusal to take preventive measures? They're putting chemicals in the water that turn the frickin' frogs gay. Hermaphrodism is not homosexuality. I didn't hear about this because I wasn't born at the time, but Martha Mitchell, whose husband was involved in the Watergate scandal, she tried to tell people but was called crazy and mentally ill, and her husband and others eventually had her drugged and held hostage in a hotel for months. Later, almost all the things she claimed were confirmed to be true. Mental health professionals have to be aware of the Martha Mitchell effect. That the SI were running cocaine into the US to pay for arms for Contras. I wasn't really sure if it was true until I watched a Netflix doc the other night that showed John Kerry interviewing some dude from the CIA who confirmed it. A lot of people missing the actually turned out to be true part. Love Canal, a nice neighborhood built on a toxic waste dump. Babies were born with birth defects and many anomalies such as enlarged feet, heads, hands, and legs. Adults died with mysterious illnesses. It took years for the government and corporate America to take responsibility. The Brahmin priest Holocaust in Kashmir, India, performed by radical Islamic terrorists. I love how even Indian media failed to broadcast this news. No media source properly covered this. I think Shikra is the only movie which talked about this, and the whole incident was so heartbreaking. Not sure if this counts as a conspiracy theory, but when my family went to SeaWorld after the Shamu show, I said that I thought there was something very wrong about the orca's flopped dorsal fin. My parents told me that I was being annoying and that he was fine. A few years later the trainer was killed and blackfish came out, and my family saw that I was right about the whales not being healthy. Not the strangest, but the British Army murdered 14 unarmed civilians during a peaceful civil rights march in my city, Derry, Northern Ireland in 1972. The official line for years was that the victims were armed and had attacked the soldiers first. The Sun newspaper in the UK printed a story the next day portraying the soldiers as heroes and the victims as terrorists. The government eventually admitted about 10 years ago that none of the victims were armed and the killings were not provoked. Makes it hard to believe anything the government or media say. Epstein didn't kill himself. I took a class in college called Deception Management. It was taught by a world-renowned author and deception management professional. His name is David Camp. Look him up if you don't believe me. One class in particular that we had will always remain with me. He made 2 comments. First, he showed us a video of when Obama came into office. When Obama gets done with his speech, he goes in the back to discuss personal matters. My professor elaborated that this was a very confidential meeting. When Obama returned, he told us that something in that man's demeanor changed, and he seemed completely on edge. Freaky. The second one, he showed us a picture of the moment Bush was told of the attacks on the towers. For anyone who doesn't know, deception management involves micro-expressions, which are subtle expressions that the face give off. Good indicators for a baseline. The picture showed Bush being informed while he was reading a book to a bunch of children, except the look on his face isn't of surprise, but more blank, like he knew something was up. Crazy shit. The picture showed Bush being informed while he was reading a book to a bunch of children, except the look on his face isn't of surprise, but more blank, like he knew something was up. Crazy shit. What do we expect him to do in that situation? Leap out of the chair and scream, holy shit, we're under attack. Come on, man. When I worked in the warehouse of a company whose motto was everything AZ, we had people who'd been there years swear that every few years they'd do upgrades on the large routers hanging from the ceiling. Not to improve connectivity of our scanners, but to make the RFID of our badges easier to track. A few years ago, after leaving the company, I had a while to talk with a member of corporate who said that the company invested several million in mesh networks to track employees a year, and the scanners were trash that couldn't be improved on. But they were cheap, and the employees being on task was worth 6 times the cost of replacing the scanners. This is going to be a lit YouTube video or BuzzFeed post. Kind of local. But a bunch of people in my workplace in the 1990s spread a rumor that the supervisor was a crook and was stealing from the company. Other people dismissed the conspiracy, saying that those spreading the rumor were mad at the supervisor for giving them crap assignments and bad schedules. Years later, they found out the supervisor was faking his time cards and claiming hours worked and overtime when he wasn't even on property. After he was fired, the whole group was like, "Told you so." That the government was planning to attack itself and make it look like Cuba did it. I forget the name of the declassified documents, but it's true. It's one of the chips the 9/11 goofs like to play. Operation Snow White. It was the largest act of domestic espionage in US history. It was the Church of Scientology infiltrating 136 government organizations in 30 countries with thousands of covert agents with the intent to destroy documents about the Church of Scientology. nmwikipedia.org link. Some customer I talked to somehow ended up on a rambling tangent about how he was part of a mission in the Vietnam War, where they were controlling the weather on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Yep, okay buddy, sure. I looked it up later and it turns out Operation Popeye actually happened. Watergate, Iran-Contra. Reagan coordinating with Iran to delay release of American hostages. and the vast right-wing conspiracy that Hillary mentioned. Operation Northwoods. When Fidel Castro came to power, the CIA planned to commit acts of terrorism on American citizens, shooting down passenger planes, gunning down people in the streets, etc., and blame it on Cuba to get an excuse to go to war with them. Luckily, JFK shut them down. That Pedro's mom Lydia was trying to do some Santeria on Chantel's family with them chicken feet. The KGB, now the FSB, bombed apartment buildings in Russia and blamed Muslim terrorists in order to justify starting the Second Chechen War. nmwikipedia.org link. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more interviews.